and welcome to today's webinar on coyotes. So we are gonna jump right into the presentation, and this is the first of our series. So if you guys joined us way back in 2015, this is a similar presentation to what I did back then, and we wanted to bring it to you fresh, since we are looking for things to do when we're all at home. So for today's presentation, what we're going to be going over is some history about the coyote, some basic biology, conflicts, which I'm sure is of concern for some of you and on many of your minds, and learning to coexist with them. So we're going to jump right in with history. So where did coyotes come from? Because they haven't always been here in Florida. And so if you look at the map on your screen, you can see the darker the orange is the more historical the range. So mostly out west, kind of in the central and western portion of the United States. And then they slowly began their expansion further west into the north and to the northeast. And then most recently, the lighter color, they made their full way all the way to the eastern part of the United States and south, eventually making their way into Florida. And so how did that happen? So there were a couple factors that play into this. One was the eradication of the wolves out west. So there were major efforts and government programs to eliminate and get rid of wolves because they were posing threat to ranchers out west, and they were destroying their livestock. And so there were lots of efforts to get rid of wolves, and as the wolf populations declined, that presented an opportunity for coyotes to come in and fill that niche. And then also over time, landscape changes have helped and aided the coyotes' expansion to the east. So changing landscapes from these forested landscapes to these more agricultural landscapes, whether it's for crops or cattle or you name it, these kind of open areas are more preferred by coyotes. I'd be willing to bet, for those of you that have seen a coyote in Florida, that it was in a more open area like a golf course or a cemetery or a ball field than it was in a forested area. And furthermore, coyotes are not picky in terms of their, a little bit in terms of their habitat, but outside of that, they are opportunistic feeders, meaning they will, and they're also, we'll talk about their diet later, but they're omnivores, so they eat plants and animals. So they can pretty much make do with whatever food source is available. And then they have a large litter size, which we will also talk about when we get into the biology of coyotes. So a quick poll question for you. We'll be throwing these up throughout to kind of just keep you guys engaged. This is true or false. So Shannon has put it up on your screen. True or false, coyotes have been documented in every county in Florida. Yes, so coyotes have been documented in every county in Florida. And there are several studies that have all shown and proven these sightings throughout the state. And so there's no escaping, no matter where you go in Florida, they are everywhere. And so I'm curious, you guys can do this in a variety of ways, but if you could raise your hand if you have seen a coyote in Florida. So again, you could click on the participants icon on your screen, and there should be an option there to raise your hand. If you can't find that, you can use the reactions button and give me a thumbs up. Oh man, lots of people. We're at 13. Awesome. Okay, so a decent number of you guys have seen coyotes in Florida. If not, it's probably only a matter of time. It's a very exciting thing. I've only seen 2 since I've been in Pinellas County. I've been here 8 years, so there is a chance you can see one. All right, so we're gonna jump into some biology about the coyotes. So I mentioned before that they are considered opportunistic feeders and that they are omnivores, eating plant and animal material. So in terms of animals, they will feed on small mammals, things like squirrels, rabbits. Occasionally they'll feed on things like birds and even sometimes some baby deer, but that's not a common prey item. But they do help to keep populations of those species in check, so they fill an important role there. So historically we had the red wolves in Florida, and they are no longer here, and so they're filling that niche to keep we call them mesopredator populations under control. So again, they'll eat fruit, they even eat insects. They make up a decent portion of their diet, surprisingly. They will even eat dead animals, and then in urban areas where it is presented and available, they will get into garbage cans and also pet food if it's left out. Now, coyotes are not very big dogs. They can vary, but on average, the males, which are larger and heavier than the females, they average 25 pounds. So that's not super huge. It's not small, but they're a decent size, medium-sized dog. They're about just under 2 feet when you measure them off the ground at the shoulders. And they have long, skinny, kind of lanky legs, and they will reach full size in less than 2 years. So they're quick to get big. This is actually a picture on your screen, is another one taken right over in my county in Clearwater, Florida. This was by Lou Claudio, so a picture right in his yard of a coyote. This is another one, picture we captured on a trail camera that we have set up at Brooker Creek Preserve up in Tarpon Springs. And so this kind of emphasizes they are considered crepuscular. That's a fun new word. You might have heard of nocturnal and diurnal, but crepuscular means that they are most active at dawn and dusk. So right as the sun's coming up and right as the sun's going down is when they're most active. It doesn't mean that's the only time that they're active. And they are very, very good hunters and survivors, which is also aided in their ability to expand their range and continue to thrive even in urban settings. So typically you don't get blessed with all of these, good eyesight, hearing, and sense of smell, but coyotes do have all of these. And unlike what we often think of, some people might associate coyotes with wolves and wolf packs, but coyotes are most often found either with their mating pair or in small groups, and that would be family groups. They wouldn't be hanging out with other, like cross multiple families. And less often they will be in these massive packs or just by themselves. So in terms of more biology and breeding, so they breed once a year and they will mate in the winter time. So that's more or less already happened in Florida, and then they have about a 2-month gestation period, so pups will come out in the spring. So right about now is when the pups will emerge, and mentioned before that they have a large litter size. So on average, they have 6 pups in their litter, which is quite a bit in the mammal world. The most I've seen 2 different references. One was either 12, one was 12, the other was 13 for the most that they've seen or has been documented in one litter. So it can be quite large. Another unique feature or characteristic of coyotes is that both parents raise the young, and they will stay together for 9 months. That's very, very rare in the animal kingdom for both parents to stick together and help to raise the babies. And then, so think about all this information, and then they're sexually mature at 1 year of age. So you can do the math, and their populations can grow pretty quickly. So I often get asked this question, so I figured I'd make it a poll question. What do you guys think is the average lifespan of a coyote in the wild? I will have Shannon pull up the poll question on your screen. Do you think it's 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 9 to 10, or 11 to 12? So you guys were close. The majority of you were close. So 5 to 6 years on average in the wild for coyotes. So I have that here on the screen, but one thing I want to highlight, getting back to thinking about their reproduction, is they are considered to have what's called density dependent reproductive response, which is a fancy way of saying they have the ability, based on environmental conditions, to have more or fewer pups per litter. So if there are lots of coyotes in a particular area and there's not sufficient food, litters tend to be smaller. If, say, and they found this out from doing eradication efforts, if coyotes are removed from an area, then all of a sudden there's more availability of what they need to survive: food, water, cover, shelter, and litter sizes increase. And so you may have heard or be aware that there aren't really big efforts to eradicate coyotes in the state, simply because it's not effective due to this ability of coyotes. So pretty neat biological feature that they have. In terms of threats to coyotes, and in particular in our part of the state, or at least in my county, we don't have the Florida panther, which would be their main natural enemy. But humans are by far the #1 threat to coyotes, whether it's hunting and trapping or car strikes. And then in other parts of the United States and also in South Florida, again, those larger predators such as the panther and elsewhere where the wolves are present would be natural threats to the coyote. And this is a picture here sent in by a resident of Clearwater, a picture of a coyote just running right through the neighborhood. So they are everywhere. And in terms of their dens, so we'll talk a little bit about this, but they, in urban areas, it can vary quite a bit, but in a natural setting, they will just take advantage of something like a palmetto thicket, so which we have lots of in our natural areas, hollowed out logs. So as trees age and get older, often the center part of the tree can hollow out and create a nice den area for coyotes. Brush piles, whether they're naturally created or created by people. And then also they will expand burrows of other animals like the armadillo or the gopher tortoise. So they'll take advantage of what's already there and dig it out a little bit further to accommodate their larger size. Now, in terms of their home range, which is what basically the space that a coyote needs in order to find everything it needs to survive, the food, water, cover, shelter, space. What the research has shown is that it's actually, the space requirement is larger in a natural area than it is in an urban area. And it might seem counterintuitive, but if you think about an urban setting, you know, if you had, say, a little balcony area, the coyote could find a den underneath there, or if you have a house that's somewhat elevated, they can find shelter underneath your house and have a den space there. They can find water from your pool, or if you have a little pond, get food out of your garbage can, you know, so they don't have to go very far to find what they need as they would in a natural area, especially thinking water. We're in the dry season. I'm sorry, we're getting into the wet season now, but when we were in the dry season, water was scarce, so they'd have to travel further to find what they need. And this is, I did want to point out, influenced by habitat quality. So if the habitat quality is not great, then that natural area, home range, will probably be larger. They will have to go further to find what they need to survive. This image on the left here is just to show that coyotes can travel really far. So outside of this home range data is, so this one particular coyote traveled approximately 40 miles and they radio collared it. And I've seen other data to show they will travel quite far over a longer period of time. So unfortunately, there's not a ton of money to go towards coyote research. So the research itself is limited to really understand why they even travel these long distances, but we do know that they are capable of doing so. Okay, so we're gonna play a fun little highlights game for those of you that remember the Highlights magazine. So on the left, these are coyote tracks. On the right, we have bobcat tracks, if you can make them out. And so I'll just give you a second to kind of look back and forth at what you might notice is different between the two. Okay, so some of you may have said or noticed that in the coyote tracks, you can make out some of the claw marks that are lacking in the bobcat tracks. That would be the main difference between the two. If you also outline them, the bobcat track is much more circular compared to the oval shape of a coyote track. That'll come into play more with the next slide. But if for those of you that have cats at home, you know that they have retractable claws. And so when they're walking around, their claws are not out. And so when they leave a mark in the sand, it will most likely not have claw marks. Obviously, it depends on kind of the substrate that it's on. But dogs, for those of you that have dogs, they don't have that ability to retract their claws. So when they are going to leave a track mark, it's often going to include the claw marks. With the coyote, it's often the top two that register. Sometimes it'll get all four, but so you can hopefully notice those two differences there. And then when you compare a coyote track to a domestic dog track, again, you really want to focus on the outline or the overall shape. Coyote tracks are longer than they are wide. So it's going to create a much more oval shape. It's a very narrow track compared to dog tracks that when you trace the outline will be more circular and often just spread out a little bit more. If you have a trail of tracks that you are looking at, if you think about dogs, if you've ever watched a domestic dog walk, they're kind of like all over the place. They're just like, la, 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 I don't, really mind where I'm going. So their tracks will be like all over the place. Coyotes are on a mission when they're walking. So if you have a set of tracks, they're often in a very straight line. And if you don't have tracks, but you have SCAT, if you want to whip out your measuring tape, somebody had the fun job to find the average length of coyote SCAT, which averages 4 inches long. This can obviously be quite variable, but this is, again, on average. It will often contain hair of the prey. And when it does, that also helps to maintain the shape of coyote SCAT, which is helpful for identification. It will vary also based on their diet. So if they're feeding on mammals and things, and there will be more hair and bones present. If they're feeding on, say, more organs or fruit, their stool might be not as solid, we'll just say that. So it can be quite variable, but those are some things to note. Often tapered at the ends, not always, but compared to probably the most likely thing to confuse it with would be bobcat SCAT. And bobcat SCAT will be more, it'll look almost segmented compared to the coyote SCAT, which tends to just be more tubular. So fun to talk about poop, right? All right, so coyote conflicts. This is our last poll question. Another true false before we jump in. Do you guys think coyotes cannot transmit diseases to humans, pets, or livestock? It is false. So the majority of you got it correct. Coyotes can transmit diseases to humans, pets, and livestock. I know the wording on that could be somewhat tricky, but they have dozens of diseases that have been documented. Rabies is probably number one that comes to people's mind. It's not something that we encounter often in terms of people being bitten by a rabid coyote or pets even, but they are carriers of the disease, and along with several parasites. So you can see the list there, the ticks, heartworms, whipworms, lungworms. If any of you own cats or dogs, you might be familiar with these terms, and we get to bring our domestic pets to the vet to be treated for these things and to help prevent these things from harming them. Coyotes obviously don't have that option, and so they are carriers and susceptible to these diseases and parasites. So that is one potential thing to be cautious of, but it's again not a common thing, or we'd be hearing all about it on the news. So the reality is, whether you find this is good news or not, I'll leave that up to you, but the risk to your pet is much greater than it is to us as humans. The great news is that it's a super easy problem to fix. So for those of you that have cats, which are, especially feral cats, are a prey item for coyotes, is to keep your cat indoors. And that serves several benefits. It protects our native bird species and several other smaller vertebrate species from being attacked by domestic cats, and it keeps your cat safe, which is most important. And then when you are walking your dog, it's recommended to have a 6-foot leash or shorter. So we don't want those ones that extend out, you know, forever and ever and wrap around the mailbox and trip people. Because if your dog sees a coyote, its instinct is likely going to be to run, whether it's towards it or away. And that longer leash, you know, allows them that ability, which will trigger the coyote to possibly chase. So if you have them close, then you can either get close to your dog, or if it's a smaller dog, you can pick them up. And often, this really goes with any wildlife species, is when they become what we classify as a nuisance species, it's often because of us and our behavior towards the animal, and often is associated with us feeding them. And so we ask that you please do not feed the coyotes, or really any wild animal, because then they begin to associate people with food, and then they start to get closer and closer until it becomes a not good interaction. And whether you want to admit it or not, the statistics show that the dogs that you live with in your home are much more likely to cause a threat to you in terms of bites compared to our wild dog, the coyote. And so there's information from the CDC and from a journal article on coyotes. Again, there's not a ton of research on coyotes, but that was the information I could find. So despite that they might look scary and be new, they're relatively new, you know, species here in Florida, we don't need to be fearful of coyotes. And so I'll talk about more on how we can coexist with these wild dogs. So I already mentioned before, never to feed the coyotes, preventing access to your garbage and pet food. So ideally, if you guys have a garbage can that you leave out for pickup, if you are able to pull it in and put it out early in the morning before it gets picked up, that's ideal, so it's not sitting out overnight. And if you have any pet food that you often leave out, again, if you can just pull it inside, at least for the overnight hours, and then put it back out. That's a quick, easy fix for that. I mentioned before, keeping your cat indoors, watching small dogs especially. The small dogs are going to be more similar to the size of their, the small mammals that they would prey upon, compared to a larger dog that they might see more as a threat than a food opportunity. If you do get approached by a coyote, you don't want to run away. You want to kind of stand your ground, and our goal is to instill fear in the coyotes. We want them to become fearful of us as people. And so you want to, I usually say make yourself act like a crazy person, but you want to wave your arms, shout towards the coyote as loud as you can. And again, you just want to do what you can to scare the coyote so that it begins to go in the other direction. And you don't stop this behavior until they go in the other direction. Again, if you have small pets or children, you want to try and pick them up because, again, their instinct's likely going to be to run, and that will trigger possibly a chase instinct of the coyote. So if you do have crawl spaces underneath your house or your shed or your porch, you can consider closing that off if you don't want coyotes to possibly use that area as a den site. If you're cool with it, that's up to you. Teaching your children what to do and to not run if they see a coyote, that is very important. And of course, you know, today is just one webinar. I'm just one person. There's millions of people in the state of Florida that need to know and learn all about coyotes because we're all living with them. And so if you can share what you learned today with a friend or neighbor, we're all interacting virtually these days, so feel free to share the recording of this webinar with everyone at the end. And then there is a formal process, what we call coyote hazing, which Shannon has a link that she can push out. There's a video that highlights how to haze coyotes. So Shannon can put that in the chat box so you guys have access to that. But these are different options that they mention that you can do. So if you want to carry bear spray with you when you're out walking, if you ever did get approached by a coyote, that is an option to use that. A hose or water gun, again, we're just trying to instill fear in the coyote, so you want to spray it towards the coyote to scare it away. Air horn, anything that really makes a loud noise. We probably don't all want to be going around blowing air horns, but in the case of a coyote that seems to be getting too comfortable, that is definitely an option. Same with a loud whistle or jumping down to the bottom. This could be a fun activity to do with the kids. You can make a coyote shaker, which is basically using an aluminum can. You can fill it with money, like with little pennies or dimes or pebbles, and you'll be surprised how loud that is, and you can keep that with you on your walks. These other ones, throw a stick or stone. I want to be sure to be very clear, this is not you don't want to be, your goal is not to hit the coyote, it's to throw it towards in the direction of the coyote, again, to scare off the coyote. Our intention is not to harm the coyotes in any way. The walking stick or golf club, this is, and I included this picture appropriately. I mentioned they like golf courses, but that's to help make yourself look bigger, to scare off the coyote. And the paintball gun is also, again, we're not trying to shoot the coyote itself, but in the direction to scare him or her off. And then who should you contact if there is a problem coyote? So you can reach out to your regional Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission office. Shannon will push out the link to find out which regional office is appropriate for your area. That you can also do this on their website. They have a link to report a problem coyote, but oftentimes if it's just a neighborhood coyote and somebody wants to have that one particular coyote that's posing a threat removed, it will involve hiring a professional trapper. And so the Florida Fish and Wildlife also has a list of trappers by county that you would then have to pay as a private citizen, or if you live in an HOA, but you would pay for that service to have the coyote removed. So I want to thank you all for tuning in and learning a little bit about coyotes. There's a lot to share, so I look forward